Report from Santa Fe is made possible in part by grants from the members of the National Education Association of New Mexico, an organization of professionals who believe that investing in public education is an investment in our state's economic future, and by a grant from the Healy Foundation, Taos, New Mexico.
Hello, I'm Lorene Mills, and welcome to Report from Santa Fe. Our guest today is author and journalist and the city historian for the city of Santa Fe, Anna Pacheco. Thank you for joining us.
Lorene, I'm honored that you asked me to be on your show. Thank you so much.
Well, you're a journalist that I have respected for so long. You've been on radio, you've done columns, and now you're the city historian. And we'll talk about your new book, but for many, many years you put out a publication I love so much called La Herencia. And what were the dates that you...
I published that for 15 years, from spring 1994 till winter 2009. And I was the editor and publisher, founding publisher. So, and basically meant I did it all. I sold the ads. I worked with the photographers. I worked with the writers. I did it all.
But this was an incredible vehicle for capturing stories about our heritage and traditions of Santa Fe. And I have a stack of them at home. I mean, they're just wonderful. So thank you very much. Now, you're an author, and we're here to celebrate your new book, which is A History of Spirituality in Santa Fe. And I learned so much from this book. It's a beautiful book, by the way, beautiful photographs. But I will tell you, there are so many things I didn't know, and I really recommend it to anyone. Tell me what gave you the idea for this book.
Well, I grew up in Santa Fe, and even as a young girl, I mean, I was cognizant, I was aware that, there were different people, that weren't Catholics here. And then as I became a teenager, the Sikhs arrived, the Hare Krishnas, and so, I was aware of this, and then I went away. I lived in New York City for 16 years, and so when I came back, I mean, everything was different about Santa Fe. But then I could see Santa Fe, from a different perspective, and I just was aware of so many more spiritual groups that had come to Santa Fe in my absence. And then, so I had been thinking about this for a while, and then, the coincidence or the funny thing is that Santa Fe in Spanish means the city of holy faith. So I'm thinking, isn't that wild? We're the city of holy faith, and all types of spiritual groups are here. So I'm not just talking your basic, standard, bona fide religions, but spiritual groups, New Age, New Thought, just all these different groups. And so after I learned a lot doing that, but after I did this book too, just so many different groups here. And the one thing I found out, I asked everybody, why are you here? And virtually all of them, whether they were a standard, bona fide, old European religion, or some of these New Thought, New Age people, or people from the East, they all said it's the land. So my first chapter is called A Sacred Landscape, and it talks about, millions of years ago when this place was shaped by the volcanoes, and it created the different mountains. And so everybody, all of them mentioned the mountain vortex, because, we're surrounded by the Jemez, Sangre de Cristos, the Ortiz Mountains. So this whole area, we're kind of like in this bowl surrounded by mountains. And so that was part of it.
Well, you do. I love how the scope of your book is from geology, the actual sacred land, to theology, the actual sacred.
And it connects.
Yeah. And so when you talk about the geology, you mentioned that the Colorado Plateau, which is, and talk about the Four Corners and Chaco and Mesa Verde.
Well, that was the other thing people would bring up. So not only are we surrounded by this mountain vortex here, but, this is the only place in the nation where 4 states meet. And so it includes, Chaco Canyon, Mesa Verde, Canyon de Che, I can never pronounce it right. Canyon de Che, and Monument Valley. And that's where, so the second chapter, I talk about honoring spirits. So it all goes into the Anasazi Indians. And basically all the pueblos surround this area are descendants of the Anasazi, and they are all up in that region. And so in the part about the Colorado Plateau, when all this activity was going on with volcanoes, it reshaped the Rocky Mountains, which the Sangre de Cristo Mountains are part of. But the where the Four Corners meet, underneath is the Colorado Plateau. And during this volcanic activity, it didn't change. So when I'm doing all this research, even geologists, the only way they could explain it, they said it was mystical. Even they can't figure this out. You know, so there's something about this area. This is a spiritual area because of the landscape.
And you trace it first. You actually do a history chronologically of these amazing tides and currents and influences in our religious history. But you start with the Native Americans, and you
Of course.
quote a medicine man who says, Native American is not in the blood, it's in the heart. And it's your love of your land, of the land, and the respect for the land.
Honoring spirit.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that's where you start, and then you take it from there. But let me talk a little about your own background, because you are descended from the Spanish conquistadors on both sides. And talk to me a little about your religious background. First, let's talk about your genealogical background.
Well, you know, my father, I've always kept my maiden name. My father was Pacheco, and my mother was an Ortiz, and her parents were both Ortiz, so she was a double Ortiz. So on my mother's side of the family, I had all my genealogy done, and I'm a descendant of Nicolás Ladrón Ortiz, who came as a lieutenant with Don Diego de Vargas during the reconquest of Santa Fe in 1692. So Nicolás Ortiz is my grandfather, 7 times removed. On my father's side of the family, the Pachecos have been in northern New Mexico since the 1600s as well. But my great-grandfather, he came to Santa Fe, Jose de la Cruz Pacheco. That's what Pacheco Street here in Santa Fe is named after. So de la Cruz means of Santa Cruz, near the Chimayo area. So he came at the beginning of the 20th century, and so for sure the Pachecos have been here since at least the beginning of the 20th century. But on my mother's side of the family, we've been here since at least 1692.
And it's not just Pacheco Street, it's Don Gaspar.
Don Gaspar Avenue is named after my great-great-grandfather, Don Gaspar Ortiz. Again, he's part of that whole clan that came out, from Nicolás Ortiz. He was a prominent businessman and lawyer in the late 1800s. And, so all these
Don
connections.
Diego de Vargas?
Well, according to my genealogy, somehow I'm a cousin of his or something way back when. But I really just like to really promote my mom's Ortiz side of the family.
Yeah. So, and you grew up in Santa Fe, and talk about your early education and how somehow your mother had all of 5 generations of women in your family had been to
Loretto. They were all educated, first grade through. They all graduated from high school there. Very religious. I came from a very religious Catholic background. In my family, I had my mom's eldest brother was a Christian brother. His name was Brother Dan Ortiz. He was the founding president of La Salle University in Manila. Because all the LaSallians, they're real big on education, so they're all over the world, Monterrey, Mexico, different places.
But our own College of Santa Fe.
And yes, of course, College of Santa Fe, St. Michael's, all founded by the Christian brothers. So that was my mom's brother. Then I had a cousin that was a priest, and then I had a cousin that was a Trappist monk. I had a cousin that was a Loretto nun. And then on my dad's side of the family, I had a cousin, his name was Brother Steve Armenta. Again, he was part of the LaSallian Christian Brothers. He taught at St. Michael's.
Let's get up to your own childhood, because although all these 5 generations of women had gone to Catholic school, little Anna...
Well, let me tell you. So I'm from Santa Fe. My family's from Santa Fe, but I was actually born in Albuquerque because at the time my dad was a butcher and he was working at Piggly Wiggly in 1956. And so my parents lived in this little area called Pajarito, which was real close to Isleta Pueblo. So they would go to San Agustin Church on the Pueblo. So I was actually baptized at San Agustin Church and Isleta Pueblo. I think that's kind of a cool little detail. So anyway, we came back up here when I was 4. I started out at St. Francis parochial school. But, I don't know. I just wasn't cut out to kind of follow the rest of the family. And back in those days, in the early 60s, the nuns used to hit you. They'd hit you with the ruler, and it was just a real different time. And I guess I wasn't the best behaved kid. So at one point, this nun was going to hit me, or she did hit me, and I started crying. And I, got up, and I threw a desk at her, and I, kind of just freaked out. So they asked me to leave. So in the 3rd grade, I got expelled from Catholic school, and I broke my mother's heart because I was going to be the first woman in and 5 generations to not attend Catholic school. So then I was educated at the public schools, and it all turned out, it's all good. It all
Well,
turned
you
out well.
actually ended up for a time at the College of Santa Fe, which was a Christian school.
It
So you
was back
redeemed
then.
yourself, and your work redeems you.
I'm still making amends to my parents. They're gone now, but it's like, see, Mom, see, it wasn't so bad. Look at these things I'm doing for the Catholics.
But look what you're doing for the community. You were 7 years on the National Hispanic Cultural Center Board. You're on the Santa Fe Fiesta Foundation Board. The New Mexico Community Foundation gave you a wonderful award called the Luminaria in honor of what you've done for preserving the culture. It goes on and on. The National Association of Press Women, the Governor's Outstanding Women Award, and even Penn, New Mexico Association of Writers gave you an award for preserving the culture. So you came back here and you landed, and you have saving so much of this stuff from oblivion. But one of the approaches you have to the spiritual history of Santa Fe is in terms of refuge. You look at all these layer and layer of different religions and New Age groups that come in, oftentimes in fleeing war or because of war. It's a long chronology, but can you give us kind of your favorite stories about how these spiritual entities were drawn here and how they influenced our lives here and internationally?
Well, that was a common thread throughout. It's virtually all these major groups came here as a result of a war. But the most important one is the reason we are even called Santa Fe. It is because of the longest war in recorded history between the Moors and the Spaniards. And so when they finally stopped fighting in 1491, Queen Isabella decides to name this area Santa Fe de la Vega, which is Holy Faith of the Meadows or something. So then they name another town, Santa Fe, up in northern Spain near Barcelona. Then there's a third city in Spain named Santa Fe in southern Spain. And then our Santa Fe, there are 13 official Santa Fe's in the world. We are the 4th Santa Fe, and we're the first one out of Spain. Our full name is La Villa Real de Santa Fe de San Francisco of Assisi. So it's the Royal City of Holy Faith of St. Francis of Assisi. So that's the very first one. So anybody who knows, and our Santa Fe is like world renowned now, but it's because we are named as a result of the longest war in recorded history. Then soon after that, from 1821 to 1846, we're part of Mexico. So there's this Mexican-American War that eventually brings in the Americans in 1846. With them comes they come in. We get the Baptists, we get the Presbyterians,
the Mormon battalion.
The Mormons, they come in with Kearney, and they're the only religious battalion in U.S. history. That's another war. They're here. The Episcopalians, the Masons come with the Civil War. I mean, it just goes on and on. With World War I, we get Emmanuel Lutheran Church because they're pacifists. World War II brings in the I Am religion. It brings in the Buddhism with the Japanese internment camp. With the Korean War, we get the Unitarian Universal Church. It just goes on and on. With the Vietnam War, we get the Sikhs. I mean, all these major religions come to settle here as a result of a war because they're fleeing their native homelands.
We're speaking today with Ana Pacheco about her beautiful new book, A History of Spirituality in Santa Fe. And one thing that is perhaps unusual about how all those groups were received was that there has always been an attitude of tolerance and live and let live here once the original Catholic war against the Native Americans was settled, and then it could be a little more live and let live, so that these groups were allowed to come in and they were able to flourish, and there was a lot of interchange between many of these groups, wasn't there?
Well, and it continues today. They're very. It's not even tolerance. It's more acceptance. It's more. They encourage each other. I mean, back in the early days of Temple Beth Shalom, before they had their temple built, the Baptist Church used to let them hold their Sunday school classes in their basement. Mm-hmm. And then when Temple Beth Shalom came around, Emmanuel Lutheran helped them out, and it just goes on and on. Today, Hamakom, They're a Jewish group here. They hold their services at the Unitarian Universal Church. So people are very welcoming, and they want to encourage everybody. And there was a few years ago, and I write about this in the book, that there was some politician was kind of making some noise about the Muslims up in Abiquiu, and all of the different groups stood together and they said, no, we're not going to tolerate this. It's okay. And so we just stand up for each other here.
I'd like to, if I may, go back to your personal history a little bit more. You were raised Catholic, and then there was this thing about the crypto-Jews and the conversos that was suddenly discovered. About when did people realize that of the 19 founding families of Santa Fe, that 11 of them were Jewish, but because, like the Native Americans, when they converted to Christianity, they put a pastiche of Christianity over some of their basic religious beliefs. The same thing with the crypto-Jews or the conversos. Tell me about your own experience as you discovered, like everyone did, suddenly what. Can you tell me about that?
Well, and it went back to when I was publishing La Herencia. So I started the magazine in 1994, and by 1996, I had been approached by a local writer in Albuquerque, to do something about this. And I had kind of been hearing about this, but I really didn't know anything about it. And I tell people, scholars, people that are really history buffs, they knew about this, but the basic general public didn't know much about this. So in winter of 1996, we did this cover story, and it was, this great cover with a crucifix overshadowing the Star of David, and it says New Mexico Sephardic Jews, the crypto Jews, the conversos, the ones that had to convert. And when that article came out, it opened up the floodgates. We were getting calls from Israel, from Argentina, and all these people were calling up and saying, well, I remember my grandma used to do this, and all these stories. So I honestly believe that since that came out, that was kind of like the beginning of, all over the world, people were writing books about this. I think it really started to catch on with that particular issue of La Herencia. Then I had heard, while I was publishing the magazine, you're Jewish, because Ortiz in Hebrew means light, and Pacheco's definitely of a Jewish name. And then my dad's mother was a Pino. Pino is definitely a Jewish name. And so people kept saying, you got to do your DNA. You are Jewish. And I was like, yeah, whatever. And so finally, just before my dad died in 2007, I knew he was in failing health. It's like, it's now or never. So I did his DNA, and sure enough, it came back. He had the J2 marker. So, and it's easier on the male side because, they carry the same chromosome, male through male through male. So for sure, he was Jewish. My mom was had already passed away, but I did her sister, and that indicated that we were probably Jewish. But I was going to have to do more work, to get deeper into it. But at that point, my dad was dying. I just didn't get into it, so it was fine. So I found out that I was, of a Sephardic Jewish ancestry, but I was raised for a Catholic. So I always tell people, 400 years ago I was Jewish, then I was Catholic, and then after I did this book, I fell in love with the Tibetan Buddhists here in town, and in the book I talk about it. I interviewed this Buddhist monk, and he shows me the Buddhist book of prayers, and in that book there's the prayer to Saint Francis of Assisi. And he talk about they have this great respect for Our Lady of Guadalupe and for Christ. And I said, hey, this is my background. So I really like the energy. So now I go to the Carmelites on Sunday mornings at 7, and at 10 o'clock I go to the Buddhist temple. So now I have started my own religion. I'm a Kabu. I'm a Catholic Buddhist. See, in Santa Fe, you can start your own religion.
Yes.
In all honesty, I'm a Catholic, but I think I just love the whole. I just like Buddhism. I just like the peacefulness of it. I love the meditation. So it's a nice thing that I'd like to incorporate into my spiritual practice. And I think that's what's so wonderful about Santa Fe is that you can be, you can have your basic religion you were born with, or you could have adopted something, but it's okay to incorporate different things. Virtually every house I go to, and even if you're older, you'll have your crucifixes and your saints, but you'll have some crystals in the windows, and you might have a menorah, or you might, so everybody has like a mix of different spiritual practices, and I think that's beautiful because we all need so much help here. So if you have like a whole bunch of people you can pray to, more power to you.
Yes. So I was particularly interested in the IAMs from the 20s, and weren't they related somewhat to Madame Blavatsky and the Theosophical movement?
Yes, and it actually was in 1937. It was Guy and Edna Ballard. In 1937, Guy Ballard he's an engineer from Chicago, and he's he's hiking up at Mount Shasta in California, and this ethereal figure appears to him. His name is Saint Germain, not as a Catholic saint, but he was actually a bona fide in history. He was a court, a European court, of the European court, and so he caught the imagination of many people because he could speak many languages. He was very educated, and so anyway, Saint Germain appears to Guy Ballard, and he gives him these numerous discourses, these different, and so they start this religion, I am, and so basically it's about, I am, God is within me, I am God. So there's this whole thing out here, and they were also followers of Theosophy and Miss Blavatsky,
and
so
use of color and sound,
and that's actually they're considered one of the first New Age religions, because color and sound are a big part of New Ageism as well. But I Am is the first American-born sect in this country. So in other words, all the in the early days, early 20th century, all these and the late 19th century, all these religions that come from Europe, or they had been, Buddhism or different religions from the East. But suddenly there's this new religion that is born in the United States, and so they come to Santa Fe in 1942. So that was just very interesting, and I see that's a neat thing about having been born here. I knew about the I Ams because my mother's hairdresser was an I Am. And so like when my editor and people saw this, they were from Santa Fe, said, I had no idea the I Ams here, but you ask any Santa Fe, an old Santa Fe, and everybody knew the I Ams, and they're still here, and they're very respectful, and like I said, everybody respects everybody's beliefs.
Yes,
they may not want to join it, but that's okay too.
Another really interesting thread you trace is Yogi Bhajan and the Sikhs.
Well, that's another interesting, he comes in 1967 to Santa Fe, and from Santa Fe he launches to the Western Hemisphere Sikhism, which is the 5th largest religion in the world, and now they have a huge community up in northern New Mexico. They're still technically in Santa Fe County, and they've done really well out here. And Yogi Bhajan, way back when in 1947, when India splits up and Pakistan becomes its own state, they had to leave because of their religious beliefs. So all these, again, religions in war, having to seek other places to seeking refuge. That's what it is.
Yes. You have a wonderful picture of the Dalai Lama and Yogi Bhajan together, both exiled from their native lands.
Exactly.
And both finding refuge here in New Mexico.
Here in Santa Fe. That photo was taken in the 1990s, and the Dalai Lama is responsible for helping to build the Tibetan Center on Hickok Street, and the different temples here. So he's been very active in this area. And then I also mentioned Amma, who she's from India, and she's considered the kissing saint, and she goes around the world. And she in 1987 built an ashram here, and she says, it's in the book, Santa Fe is a spiritual Mecca. So how is it that Amma, the Dalai Lama, and Yogi Bhajan, among world leaders, religious leaders from around the world, they gravitate towards Santa Fe, and it has to do with the spiritual landscape, and also it has to do with the Native Americans. Their traditions from the it's all interwoven together. It just brings people here.
Yes. Now, what can we do to be more aware of this spiritual essence around us? We're all quite busy. We're doing politics. We're doing our everyday life. But there's a reason that all of this is going on here. And how can we kind of remove the veil and become more aware of it in our own lives?
Well, for starters, you need to buy my book. No, because basically it'll give you a whole outline of everything. It's a guide to everything that's here.
Yeah.
And then I think if you're really interested, if you have like this yearning for something deeper and you're just not getting it, then I would investigate some of these different groups out here. Go to everybody's so welcoming. You can go to the ashrams, you can go to the different places and get just a feel for the energy. I hate to keep using the word energy because I sound like New Ager here, but it's still true. It's like get a feeling for the vibes and see if it works for you. Like I said, when I went to the T&L Buddhist temple on 2nd Street, I just got this wonderful vibe. Maybe it's because they had the prayer to St. Francis in their book. I'm not sure, but it felt right to me. And that's what I'd recommend. And I think most of these groups, they encourage meditation, and even in the Catholic religion, prayer is a form of meditation. So I think if anything, if nothing else, just try to find 10 minutes to sit quiet, sit by yourself, and try to get a closer contact to God or to whatever you believe your higher power is. I should mention as well that, speaking of higher power, that Alcoholics Anonymous is listed in my book because they are a spiritual group. Mm-hmm. The Masons, they to be a Mason, you have to attest to something, a higher being. So I mean, there are all these different groups you wouldn't believe. The Salvation Army, they're a spiritual group. They're in my book. Yeah. So it's a lot of these groups. You just like, really, they're spiritual, and they are. So I think that's what people should do, is just sit quietly and see if something comes to you. But I think all of us are yearning for something.
Well, one of the things we're yearning for is more knowledge and information. Tell us your website, and then tell us about some of the pieces you have on YouTube. Now, you are the city historian for the city of Santa Fe, so you've done a lot of pieces. I know about my hometown, Agua Fria. You've done a lot of beautiful little pieces with archival footage. So what is your website?
Well, the website is my name. It's AnnaPachecoSantaFe.com, and you'll see all the different things I did up there. The nice thing about that, too, is the 15 years of La Herencia, it's all online. And if you ever had some time or you just needed something to do, there's a 350-page index. You can go through everything. I mean, there's a wealth of information out there. And then I do this series as the city historian for Santa Fe. I've been finding, I used to do a blog for like 2 or 3 years, and nobody reads, or most people don't read as much anymore, and it's gotten even worse with Facebook and stuff. I mean, our attention span is like a nanosecond, if that. So then I came up with this idea of doing these little history vignettes. They're like 2 minutes long, and they're called Threads of Santa Fe History. So if you Google Threads of Santa Fe History, there'll be about 25 or 30 up there, and they're just different aspects of Santa Fe history. As you mentioned, I did one on the Agua Fria village. I did one, it's called A Second Chance at Life, and it's about all the tuberculars, the people that came here at the turn of this, late 1890s till 1940. People were coming not just to Santa Fe, but to Albuquerque and different parts of New Mexico to try to get cured of tuberculosis, because back then there weren't antibiotics. So there's one on that. I do the history of La Conquistadora, who is the oldest Marian figure in the United States. Just different things. I did a fun one earlier about just the history of baseball in Santa Fe, and how how the penitentiary used to hold regular games, and how the Madrid miners and the mining companies, there were a lot of professional baseball players that came to New Mexico, and they couldn't get work as baseball players. They became miners. I mean, just all these different things. So that's like a nice, again, it's 2 minutes. I mean, everybody's got 2 minutes, I think. And it's always, I narrate the segments, but there's all this wonderful vintage photography through the Museum of New Mexico Photo Archives. That's a wonderful resource.
Well, one of the things, your book, A History of Spirituality in Santa Fe, has wonderful photographs too. And I'm afraid we've run out of time, but I want to thank you, Anna Pacheco, for coming and sharing your heart and spirit, the spirit of Santa Fe with us.
Lorene, you do the best. Thank you for what you do for our community.
Well, we're in it together, aren't we?
Thank you.
I'm Lorene Mills. I'd like to thank you, our audience, for being with us today on Report from Santa Fe. We'll see you next week.
Past archival programs of Report from Santa Fe are available at the website reportfromsantafe.com. If you have questions or comments, please email info@reportfromsantafe.com. Report from Santa Fe is made possible in part by grants from the members of the National Education Association of New Mexico, an organization of professionals who believe that investing in public education is an investment in our state's economic future, and by a grant from the Healy Foundation, Taos, New Mexico.